My journey into visionary art has been anything but ordinary. It began with curiosity about consciousness, took me through the world of Disney, and eventually led me to painting portals into the infinite. Let's start with the origins. So, I was born in South America, in Colombia, and I grew up since the age of 3 moving back and forth between Colombia and the United States. So, this very frequent moving created some language barriers for me as a small child, since I would be for a couple years speaking Spanish, then a couple years speaking English, and then flip flop back and forth. I would say both of my languages were a bit behind at the time, both my Spanish and English, due to the circumstances I was under. And because of this, I started to gravitate a lot towards artworks. And I became fascinated how, regardless of where I was at, I could draw something and people would understand what I was trying to communicate. They would understand if I drew a little house that I was referring to a house, or if it was a sunny day, they'd get the feeling. Even when I made friends that were from other countries that spoke neither English or Spanish, let's say, if I made a friend from Japan, or there was a kid in my class from who knows where, I would show them the image and they would understand it also. And so as a little kid, I felt that art was magic. It transcended language and I thought it was fascinating. I continued to put a lot of effort towards creating artworks. And later on, as I grew up, language was no longer a major barrier. My English became sufficient, and so did my Spanish, but I continued to have a fascination with art and its ability to transcend language, especially when it came to emotions. Then I came across a series of interesting events. I was going through what I would call a dark night of the soul when I was around 12, where I decided to become atheist at the time due to some difficult life circumstances and very intense bullying. Very shortly after making that decision, I was having a lot of nightmares and I started to become aware that they were nightmares. I became lucid in these nightmares. And after a few times of waking myself up from the nightmares, I decided, hey, what if instead I stay in them and I change them and I make them beautiful and I explore? I started to lucid dream, even though I didn't know at the time that lucid dreaming was a thing. I would tell my family, my friends, and they thought it was strange when I would tell them, hey, I'm aware that I'm dreaming in my dreams and I'm flying around and exploring galaxies. And they thought it was very weird. I ended up Googling it, knowing you're dreaming in a dream, and found out that it is a thing. It's called lucid dreaming. And from there, I became so fascinated with consciousness. I realized that there's so much more than what people tell us. This was a direct experience of that. And I started to gravitate very strongly towards books on consciousness. I started to read books on meditation, on yoga, on psychedelics, on anything that altered consciousness and how I could further explore it. Eventually, that led me to coming back to having my own connection with the divine and no longer having the label of atheist. And that, I would say, is where my fascination with both spirituality and art began, was from those circumstances in my youth. So as I continued to grow up in high school, paint these weird dreams that I had, I started working with psychedelics around 16, which I know is far too young for most people, but I started to paint a lot of these psychedelic experiences, which were absolutely beautiful and divine. I would take these plant medicines and dive deep into meditation as a 16-year-old and create strange artworks about deities and oneness and enlightenment at that young age, which at the time in high school, it was something that not a lot of other people understood. I was starting to experience lucid dreams where I would leave my body during my sleep. So I started working with astral projection and would have hundreds of years worth of experiences in one night of lucid dreaming. Not a lot of people to relate to at the time, but something I continued to take very seriously was my artwork, because it was my way of expressing these strange experiences that I could not share with a lot of people. And telling them in words never felt sufficient. So I continued to put them into artworks because instead of explaining them to people, they would get the feeling of the experience. At least it was my own way of letting all these things that transcended language to be expressed, and in a very similar way to how I felt at a very young age, where words were not sufficient. With now these new mystical experiences of lucid dreaming, psychedelics, and various other ways I was exploring consciousness through meditation and yoga and breath work, these experiences transcended words as well, and again was my outlet, my way of expressing it, just how it had been as a child when words fell short to describing what I felt. So I studied art as much as I could through high school, both fine arts and graphic design. Then in college, I continued to study fine art and graphic design. For a while, I focused on really getting my realism skills tuned, just on mastering depiction of light, form, and I was doing a lot of graphite pencil drawings as well as acrylic paintings in color that were highly photorealistic. All these are drawings and paintings that I will be showing on this screen. And from doing these drawings and paintings, I ended up going to this workshop that was being taught by a Disney Imagineer, since I did live in Orlando at the time. I showed him my artworks and he loved them, and we became close friends. Shortly after, I was being invited to all these art gatherings with other Disney Imagineers. They grew very fond of me and took me under their wing and began training me to be a Disney Imagineer, which is a mixture of artists and engineer. They're the ones that design and build the Disney theme parks. I was involved with the Star Wars project and was learning how to do maquettes and create designs. And honestly, the year that I trained to be an Imagineer taught me so much more than art school or anything else. It was the mega boot camp for becoming the ultimate artist, and I absolutely loved all the artists in Disney and loved the Imagineers. I'm still close friends with a lot of them, especially my mentor, who is such a talented artist and incredible guy. But when I was pursuing this path with Disney, I realized that my true spark for artworks was to express my mystical experiences. And Disney, it did feel very corporate. Absolutely love the company, but it just didn't feel in alignment with my soul journey. I wanted to express openly my use of entheogens, my lucid dreams, my inspiration of meditation, and that was not something I could openly do through the Disney outlet. So my whole family thought I went crazy when I told them I was going to leave the path of Disney, and I decided to move to the Carolinas, to the forest, to pursue making my visionary art. And this was especially around the turning point of when I left Disney and started making visionary art. I was reading a lot of visionary art books, and I had my first NNDMT experience. Even though I had worked with ayahuasca and many other psychedelics prior, around this age I started working with pure vaporized DMT, which further emphasized the fact that I felt just so inspired by mystical experiences and these spaces we can explore through inner exploration. And I really, at this point, realized that there was no point in me creating anything else but things inspired by visions. And I was receiving so many visions at the time through my meditations, through lucid dreaming, through working with entheogens, that I decided to go full force towards creating visionary art. This was a pinnacle point of, I felt like I had been doing my spiritual practice of steady meditation probably for about a decade at that point, and I had been training very intensely my art and art skills, but in a very realistic way. And at this point is where they came together and I began making visionary art. So my spiritual path and my artistic path finally came together fully, and I started to create specifically visionary art, which there had been a trickle of spiritual artworks for a bit, but from this point, this was really the turning point where it all became very visionary art focused. Thankfully, to my surprise, the world received my visionary art with a lot of love and praise. I ended up getting requested to do album covers, commissions, social media followings began to grow, and honestly, I think it was just a response to being in alignment with the path that my heart wanted to go in, and people feeling that, feeling these visions, these expressions of mystical experiences. So it all started flowing very beautifully, and I became very inspired. Really, the core of my art became very clear. It solidified that it was a passion to raise consciousness, to help raise consciousness, even in a little way that I could, which included raising my own consciousness. And in that way, my art is almost a diary of my inner visions that I get through mystical experiences. And when I create them in that way, where it's genuine, inspired by some of the most incredible experiences I have had in my inner journey, I feel like that's when it resonates very deeply with others that have had similar experiences, and they can feel that frequency, that vibration in the artworks. Creating art became a sort of meditation, of getting into deep flow state, of it being a devotional act towards God, towards the clear light mind, towards pure consciousness. And I was very happy to start showcasing, doing gallery shows, going to festivals, and doing live art. But predominantly, as a person that's a huge hermit, my predominant influence continues to be online. That's how I prefer to connect with the world. And I've been doing this for really, I would say that turning point was around 2018. It's 2025 now. I'm 29 years old and love continuing to express myself in this visionary art community. And around 2020, I further got clarity on why I had this huge drive to use art to help raise consciousness. And that was through doing a past life regression hypnosis where I remembered my past life and taking the Bodhisattva vows in Buddhism, which are vows you take to reincarnate to help liberate all beings from suffering. And it's a vow that one pursues in daily action through compassion. And I see now that my creations are an expression of that through artworks, through poems, through daily actions. I do my best to express my vows and celebrate those vows of being here to be of service. So I continue to expand in how I can further pursue helping raise consciousness, including my own consciousness. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at some specific artworks that I've created and talk a little bit about their meaning. Crystal Palace, which is a vision I got on LSD about the interconnectedness of all beings. It was while I was laying in bed under this beautiful medicine, meditating, and I started to get taken to this place of light where all the beings were interconnected through the torus. And really, I feel that in day-to-day life, we're all interconnected, but sometimes we just can't see it visually. But it's tuning into that reality where we can be very aware about the interconnectedness of all of us into infinity. So that's a little bit about this piece. Another popular piece is The Infinite Self Plays the Game, which I have actually done a couple of versions of. But this piece was inspired by a DMT vision where I saw the infinite self, you can call it source, God, playing the cosmic game of existence and overlooking it with compassion and seeing the beauty of it all, transcending suffering, and it's being a representation of transcending duality of yin yang, masculine, female, light, dark, into the place of the non-dual. So that's a little bit about this piece. Next, the piece True Reflections, which is another popular piece inspired by DMT vision. It's actually not just in this piece. There's a lot of other pieces, if you look closely, will include this infinite mirror. And what the infinite mirror represents is that when we look deeply at our true nature, when we reflect deeply on who we truly are, our true nature, we see the infinite, that we are the infinite. So I like to include it, especially in a lot of artworks I've done of deities, because it's meant to be a symbol of a reminder that these beings are not something outside of ourselves, but part of us. They're an inner archetype that we can tune into instead of something outside that we admire, but it's about finding that interconnectedness, that oneness, that interbeing. Which brings me to sharing a few of my Hindu series, which was a series I did after working with DMT for a bit and seeing a lot of the Hindu gods and goddesses during these altered states of consciousness. This was a recurring theme in a lot of my DMT journeys, where I would go in there and visit these Hindu deities in their temple. I had been practicing yogic traditions for probably a decade before having these interactions, and I always really deeply resonated with the teachings of Hinduism and yoga, union, but I never really connected very deeply with the deities, because it was like I resonated with everything the yogic tradition said, but then there were these deities that I was like, why? There was no personal connection until I started working with DMT a lot and I started to interact directly with these deities in my inner journeys. And through these inner journeys, I developed a personal connection to these deities and ended up creating this series of Hindu deities where it is very DMT style, because that's how I would see them, and they taught me a lot of lessons. And while I created these artworks, I would very often chant the mantra of each of these deities. I'm going to put on the screen a few more examples of some of my artworks just so you can get an idea. And again, the vast majority of them are inspired by oneness, by God, by source, by light, by community, by love, and by meditation. I would say those are my most reoccurring themes of inspiration. But let me know if you guys want me to do a longer video going deeper into the meaning of some of these artworks. Some closing thoughts. I am so grateful to pursue being a visionary artist and get to share it with all of you. I would say predominantly my main thing, if anything, is my spiritual journey and doing everything I can to uplift others and to be in the vibration of compassion. But the main form I express that is through 2D artwork, even though I also do poems and videos and all sorts of other things. So I hope that this video inspires you to express yourself in whatever way you like to express yourself. If you've been wanting to be a visionary artist, biggest tip is to just start and go for it, and the artworks will get better the more you do them. And if you would like to support my visionary art, I have originals and prints in my website, Juliana Garces Art. The link is in the description. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe for all things mystical. Thank you so much for watching and have a beautiful rest of your day.